English translation 614th contact. Monday, the 23rd of February 2015, 14:03 hours.
Greetings, Ptah, dear friend, and be welcome. It is nice that you find time again to come here and deal with our problems that have arisen again, and that need to be clarified.
You know, my friend, that I like coming here and talking to you, no matter what you have to say about the things to be addressed. Greetings to you too, Edouard. What we have to discuss about the study groups and the national groups should actually be something that should be openly mentioned in the discussion report.
Of course, whatever you say.
Then what Florina told me, according to your explanations, is to say that, of course, every study group in a country has to be assigned to the respective national group. Even if in a study group a core group member is assigned as a direct core group contact person. However, the regular contact and liaison point for each study group is the corresponding national group, but not the core group. The core group contact person for study groups and national groups merely acts as a silent observer, without having to intervene directly in the regular agenda matters at meetings. This is prohibited because each study or country grouping has and must carry out its business or agenda according to its own correct guidelines, without the core group contact person interfering in it. The core group contact person is only required to answer questions if he or she is addressed directly by the chairperson of the group during agenda items, etc., and if he or she is invited to speak and answer. If this is not the case, the core group contact person only has to act as a silent observer. If this is not observed by a core group contact person, then this person must immediately be released from its observer obligation and replaced by another core group member acting correctly. This is to be maintained in the study groups as well as in the national groups. And if it turns out that an interest group, which is the only one to report to the core group, etc., is an observer grouped by a core group member, then the same rules apply to this grouping as well. A core group contact person as an associate of interest groups, study groups and national groups only has the right to speak in special cases at their agenda meetings if he or she is explicitly entrusted by the core group in the parent center with a special task which he or she has to perform on behalf of the KG. If this is not the case, the core group contact person has no right whatsoever to interfere in the agenda, etc. of the relevant interest group, study group, or national group, unless he or she is requested by the respective chairperson of the relevant group to make a statement and to speak and answer. Each FIGU group is acting independently in every respect, and therefore an observer has no right to interfere in their affairs of any kind, unless they are requested to do so by the chairperson of the respective group, as has already been said. Should difficulties and ambiguities, etc., arise in one of the FIGU groupings, then it is not the task of the observer to deal with these, but rather the responsibility of the chairperson or, if necessary, the executive committee, whereby, under certain circumstances, the chairperson or the group executive committee can ask the core group observer to speak and answer, as must be said another time. If a matter cannot be clarified in this way, it must be delegated directly to the core group in the mother center.
Thank you. That's perfectly clear and requires no further question. Then there is the other, which refers to the 250-kilometer limit in relation to timeouts which still fall within the European area. When you explained the matter, I said that this mileage, measured as the crow flies, was about from the FIGU Center to Munich. However, this should not be the case because the 250 kilometers are not correct, as the portal Worldwide Distance Calculator for displaying any distance says on the internet. If I now take these internet data, then I find that we should not consider a number of airline kilometers for the timeout calculation, but the city of Munich, from where a journey to the center is probably still possible and reasonable, as I have also said Florina, and you know what I mean. I also think that for this version, which we should call the European area, we should in future establish the Eurasia-Asia border.
I have talked about this with Quetzal, and we both think that your proposal is acceptable. Therefore, not a 250 kilometers limit should be valid, but to determine the radius, the city of Munich in Germany. This is common sense and is also feasible for core group members, as you say that driving up to the AGM days within this radius is still reasonable. And what you define with Eurasia is what we mean.
Exactly. That's what I am thinking, with which there is clarity now. Then the following, with regard to the imprinting and the meaning of the mission as silent revolution of the truth. As it was called by Icarina, ambiguities obviously prevail. Consequently, I was approached with the question of what was to be understood by it. I have written the following statement. By silent revolution of the truth, it is to be understood that every person who turns to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life, deals with it and learns from it quietly in himself in order to comprehend what has been learned and understood in life, to carry it out and carry it out effectively by learning the truth given in reality and by carrying out in an inner way. So to speak, a silent revolution in order to assert oneself to the true life, to the reality and to the creational natural laws and recommendations, to carry them out and to live according to them. In this way, the learner, who turns to the teaching of the Spirit and thus to the teaching of the truth, teaching of the Spirit, teaching of the life, creates or carries out in himself in a very personal way a silent revolution of the truth.
No further explanation is necessary because you have explained everything clearly and unambiguously.
Look here, this fax was beamed to me by Marianne because Willem watched the described film on television. This is a TV film about the OSA Secret Service of Scientology. I recently watched the film on the 21st of February together with Bernadette on television, which was released on the 8th of April 2014, but was shown on television on the 21st of February. It can also be borrowed, bought, or viewed on the internet, so BEI, the Species of Scientology, stream, download, rent a movie online, buy, watch on Realease. TV http view Realays TV/D/die Spitzel. What Marianne faxed me, I copied from the internet, the following.
The Informers of Scientology, the Sect Secret Service OSA ARD Docu, send a Termin SA. 21.02 15:22:30 hours. Plots Scientology is one of the most controversial sects in the world. And yet even world stars like Tom Cruise and John Travolta follow the organization of founder Ron Hubbard. What is far less well known is that Scientology has its own secret service, the Office of Special Affairs OSA, commanded by Scientology leader David Miscavige in Los Angeles. It is the oldest private secret service in the world, and larger and more influential than the secret services of many states. But why does a religious community need a secret service? What methods does this mysterious organization use, and with what goal? Who are the people who work for this office? The Informers of Scientology, the Sect Secret Service OSA film by Marcus Thoss and Frank Nordhausen, published on 08.04. 2014 Info Original Title, The Informers of Scientology, the Sect Secret Service OSAD. 2012, Director Marcus Thoss, length 89 minutes, Stereo, Vermont, UT Scientology in Berlin. Source, DPA Jens Kalene. Why does a religious community need a secret service? Frank Nordhausen and Marcus Thoss pursue this question in their documentary about the most mysterious department of the Scientology organization. They spent more than a year researching with the camera in Europe and the USA. Her 90-minute documentary is the world's first detailed film about OSA, the Office of Special Affairs. Scientology is classified as an extremist sect, in various European countries and is therefore monitored by domestic intelligence services. The German Office for the Protection of the Constitution has been observing the organization since the mid-1990s on the grounds of justified suspicion of anti-constitutional efforts. For its aim is the establishment of a totalitarian social order. That's a well-known fact. Hardly known, however, is that Scientology itself maintains a secret service that deals with dissenters and critics. Scientology agents have been proven to have committed espionage, burglary, coercion, and other criminal offenses. Their Office of Special Affairs is the oldest and largest private secret service in the world, commanded by Scientology leader David Miscavige in Los Angeles. The sect itself describes OSA as its press and legal office, which procures information about dropouts and critics only legally. Who are the people who work for this office? What are your goals? What methods do they use? The exciting documentation provides answers to these questions. In the course of their research, Frank Nordhausen and Marcus Thoss even came across connections to high politics, all the way to the State Department in Washington. Scientology is one of the most controversial sects in the world. And yet even world stars like Tom Cruise and John Travolta follow the organization of Scientology founder Ron Hubbard. What is far less well known is that Scientology has its own secret service, the Office of Special Affairs, OSA. It is larger and more influential than the secret services of many states. The documentation traces the methods and goals of the secret service of the psychosect. How dangerous is OSA? The documentary sheds light on how the secret organization of Scientologists is taking action against critics, politicians, lawyers, the media, and dropouts in the USA, France, Russia, Greece, and above all in Germany. Scientology dropouts, some of whom also come from the highest levels of the organization, and Scientology experts tell of their fates. They report on their experiences with the Secret Service and describe how the agents of Scientologists operate worldwide. PR actions, acts of sabotage, infiltration of authorities and organizations, harassment of dropouts, and slander campaigns against opponents. That's how insiders and victims describe OSA's instruments. Many feel shaded, threatened, and intimidated, sometimes for their whole lives. According to the internal instructions of sect founder L. Ron Hubbard, methods such as infiltration, blackmail, counterfeiting, fraud, bribery, and coercion are permitted to ensure the survival of Scientology. Scientology, on the other hand, refers to OSA as its press and legal office, which only legally obtains information about critics and dropouts. The internal monitoring system is similar to that of the GDR's State Security Service, as claimed by former Bavarian Prime Minister Gunther Beckstein, for example. In 2010, the Scientology organization is facing an existential crisis. A number of senior executives have left the cult for many years, including the former head of OSA. What he and other insiders report provides deep insights into the innermost structure and state of Scientology for the first time. High-ranking dropouts openly attack current Scientology boss David Miscavige and accuse him of personally abusing them. Their allegations paint the picture of a perfidious surveillance system.
Well, we already dealt with this organization years ago and got the book from Mrs. Hartwig, until we were told that it had now been incorporated by the Scientologists and was now talking and working at their mill. However, we could not find out whether this is really true. But now that we have seen the film The Informers of Scientology, the whole thing topples us off again and shows us how this psychosect has evolved maliciously in the meantime, which has nothing else in mind but the establishment of a totalitarian world social order, which is also designed to exploit people both financially and in terms of labor. And when people who belong to the sect do not trace according to Scientology laws, then they are badly punished, not only physically, but also psychologically. There are also testimonies of people who were cult members and turned away and liberated themselves from Scientology. But many of them have been harassed and psychologically harassed by Scientology spies for years, sometimes all their lives. And as the film shows, bribery, fraud, threats, blackmail, forgery, and coercion are part of the everyday life of the psychosect, as well as the torture of delinquent cult members, which can probably be described as torture, in which the OSA or Sect Secret Service also plays a major role. All this in addition to the fact that the cult infiltrates the authorities and organizations, etc., and has established itself in the USA in their highest government as well as in the individual states and their authorities and their governments. The hammer was already in early sectarian time that Hillary Clinton, the wife of President Clinton, was worried that Scientology would not have to pay taxes, while Clinton himself wrote and published articles for the Scientology newspapers, suggesting something about Clinton membership of the Scientology psychosect.
Since I have been involved with the machinations of this criminal organization since its inception, I can only confirm what you say. The whole of the Scientology sect's endeavor, however, is not based solely on the establishment of a totalitarian world social order, but on the fact that a secret striving for effective world domination is prescribed, which is to encompass absolute control over all governments and authorities, as well as armies, secret services, and the entire economy. And in order to achieve this sect regards no means as too small, too difficult, or severe. Consequently, even the worst capital crimes have to be considered.
I am aware of that. But as long as the governments and authorities and the economic bosses and so on reach out to this cult and allow it to go ahead or even belong to this criminal organization themselves, nothing will improve and everything will only get worse. If all these responsible persons were to turn to the spiritual doctrine and learn the real, what life and evolution demand, then neither religions, sects, false philosophies, false worldviews, and especially such criminal psychosects as Scientology would no longer exist. And with regard to the doctrine of the mind, I would like to say the following. The doctrine of truth, doctrine of the mind, doctrine of life is in no way in the tradition of a religion, philosophy, or any of its sects, or a purely secular faith, but is based on reality and its truth, as well as on the creational natural laws and recommendations. This teaching, also called spiritual teaching for short, expresses extensively the facts of reality and its truth, as well as those of the spiritual concerns and of life, as well as the creational natural laws and recommendations, which were already recognized at very early times by the universal prophet Nocodemion and can be realized by every human being in life. If he honestly turns to the teaching, learns it comprehensively and consciously implements it. The doctrine of truth, doctrine of the spirit, doctrine of life is thus founded in creational natural truths which are given in reality and which also make it clear that man has at his disposal a tiny part of the spirit of creation which enlivens him as a spiritual form and is capable of reincarnation, which also states that man in his existence is a being which is not limited to just one life, but through many new incarnations lives on again and again as new personalities. This means that not the human being as such, but only his spiritual form is reincarnated or reborn, while the human being passes away in death as such with his consciousness and personality, and is transformed into a new, neutral energy, from which a new consciousness with a new personality is created by the total block of consciousness created by the spiritual form in the afterlife area. The new personality is then born into the new human body on the 21st day after the conception of a new human body, together and at the same moment in which the spiritual form also reincarnates into the new body. namely into the colliculus superior in the roof of the midbrain equal sign paired nodal point, whereby the physical body and thus also the consciousness is enlivened, and the pure instinctual state of the fetus, which existed until then for 21 days, is awakened to effective life. This enables the new human being or his new consciousness with his new personality to develop, whereby in the course of time after birth he can effectively exceed all possibilities he thinks he has. Through the proper functioning of his consciousness and thoughts, he will not only be able to solve all his personal problems and achieve his self-imposed goals, but he will actually be able to expand his consciousness and create knowledge, wisdom, and love, as well as balance and peace, freedom and harmony within himself and for his environment. The doctrine of truth, doctrine of the spirit, doctrine of life teaches that man is good according to his innermost creational natural being, but that he himself shapes his inner being according to his own free will, which he then also releases to the outside. Thus he determines his consciousness and his material life himself, according to his thoughts, feelings, and his views, opinions, and attitudes. Thus everything depends on himself and is shaped as he wants it to be according to his own will. This is also the case with regard to relations and dealings, as well as equality with regard to fellow human beings, nature and its fauna and flora, but also the orientation towards the universe, and thus also the creational natural laws and recommendations. In this respect, the doctrine of the mind, that is to say, the doctrine of truth, doctrine of the mind, doctrine of life, is not a religion, sect, philosophy, and no worldly belief, but effectively in the truest sense of the word, the doctrine of truth, with the indisputable truth of reality, that is to say, reality. Man must learn to perceive his innermost being and to do nothing less than consciously obey the creational natural laws and recommendations which are pressing within him, and to put into practice the abilities he has gained in this way in the certainty of absolute correctness in life. Thus man is able to free himself from all evil and negativity that he has learned through wrong education and self-education in his life. And if he does this, then he also frees himself from all other evils, and as an individual helps his fellow men to do the same, and to lead a creational natural lawful life. And if this spreads to humanity, then the possibility arises that it will renounce all madness such as war, brutality, violence, crime, and coercion, that it will finally become peaceful, and that all those people who enable themselves to do the progressive and the great for all earthly humanity can do so. And if this happens, then all people will also have the same rights and will be able to enjoy true peace and effective freedom and harmony. The truth is that only the doctrine of the Spirit, or the doctrine of truth, doctrine of the Spirit, doctrine of life, has preserved all the genuine values of true love, freedom, peace, and harmony unadulterated throughout all times, and has also received the hope for them. This, while all religions, sects, philosophies, and secular faiths have disregarded these values since time immemorial and allowed them to degenerate through murder, manslaughter, punishments, and wars, as well as through lies, deception, exploitation, subjugation, and slavery. Thus earthly mankind was never free from misery, suffering, and pain, but lived in it the opposite way and was trapped in every way by its dictated inhuman machinations. Nicodemean's doctrine of truth, doctrine of the Spirit, doctrine of life has taught the contrary since time immemorial, that man should be without such limitations, and that he should achieve his human goals of the evolution of consciousness without restrictions imposed on him, and find his way into the true creative life, namely without influences of religious, sectarian, philosophical, or worldly forms of faith, but only through reality and its unique and unshakable truth. And the spiritual doctrine teaches that man must not omit what is right in order to find the way to true life, in which no religious, sectarian, or philosophical God can find a place, but only reality and the effective truth that results from it. Truly, the great majority of all earthly mankind has always harbored the hope that world peace will finally come, as well as world freedom and harmony, and this hope is as strong today as it has always been. Despite all the murderous wars, uprisings, human slaughter, and catastrophes that raged and brought untold misery and suffering to countless people on earth, as well as immense destruction, and the hope of the people of Earth is very old and unbroken that all these monstrosities will finally come to an end. But this hope can only be fulfilled if it is finally found to the doctrine of truth, doctrine of the Spirit, doctrine of life, and thus to the creational natural reality and truth, and if its laws and recommendations are also perceived and obeyed. But this requires a turning away from religions, gods, sects, false philosophies, and equally false worldviews. Only when this happens does an understanding of people arise with regard to the effective truth, which arises solely from reality or reality.
That is well said, dear friend. But now it's time again for me to turn my attention to something that is only meant for your ears.